let's do something pretty cool here. Let's talk about animation in Blender. So we've spent all this time making these 3D models, but now we can actually bring them to life. We can actually give them some animation. And what better way to start with animation than with curling rocks, because who doesn't like to throw a good curling rock? Okay, before I get started, I just want to do a couple things here. So I'm going to select this curling rock. I'm going to right click, copy, and I'm going to right click, paste. So I've just created a replica of this curling rock, except it is literally spawned in the exact same spot as my original. So all I can do is press G to grab it and move it. And then I'm just going to move it along the y-axis. I'm just going to move it back like that. Now I want this curling rock to be a different color. So I'm going to click on the top part of it and pick a different color. Doesn't matter what you pick. I'm going to go with red, I suppose. Nice bright red. Just like that. So now I've got two rocks, different colors. Now what I'm going to do is, because this object, there's two separate objects here. There's the top and the bottom. I'm going to click and drag and select the entire object, or both objects. And then I'm going to press Control J. And Control J is going to let me join two objects into one. So now I can just click the rock and everything is selected, just like that. So let's go ahead and do the same thing for this rock. Select it all, hold Control and press J. And now my rock, now my rock is one single rock. Two objects into one object. Let's go ahead and take this rock and Shift D to duplicate it. And then we're going to put this one on the y-axis and we're going to put it upwards. Just like that. I'll maybe move this one a little bit back. So I've got three rocks now. And the last thing I'm going to do is they are all lined up perfectly in a row. If you can see. If I click the front view, they're all perfectly lined up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this front rock and I'm going to move it along the x-axis. And I'm just going to move it a smidge over to the right, just so it's peeking out just a little bit along that x-axis. Just like that. And this rock at the end, this furthest away rock, I'm going to move it along the x-axis as well. Except I'm going to move it quite a bit. I'm going to move it so that it's about halfway in front of this middle rock. You don't need to be perfect. It's just as long as they are slightly moved off center. So I've got 1, 2, 3 rocks. All right, it's time to animate. So to animate, we can go down to this animation bar. And if you move your mouse over this top little edge, you should see these two arrows where you can click and you can drag and you can pull the animation tab up like that. And this is where all the animation happens. So there's a couple things to know here. You can press play by clicking your spacebar, and you will see your timeline move across. So you can also just press the play button, but I think the spacebar is easier. So these are the frames that are going by, and this is where you can tell Blender where you want your objects to be at any given point in your timeline. So how does this work? Well, let's click and drag our cursor, this blue line, to the front. This will be the start of our timeline. So how do I move something? Well, First, select what you want to move. So I'm going to move this red rock first. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press I on my keyboard. This will allow you to insert a keyframe. And this basically tells Blender, okay, what are we animating? What do we want to change? What about this object are you trying to turn into an animation? There's locations you can animate, rotations, there's scales. Let's keep it simple. I just want to change the location and the rotation of this rock. So I have inserted a keyframe. You can see this little orange dot, orange diamond, I should say. So this says at frame 0, this rock should be right here. So at the start of the animation, this rock is right here in the timeline. Let's move forwards in the timeline. I don't know, let's move to 40. So I have click and dragged this blue cursor to 40. So at frame 40, where do I want my models to be? What animation do I want to happen? Well, I want to move this rock. And where do I want to move it? I want to move it so that it hits this green rock. So I'm going to press G to grab and move. And I'm going to move this rock along the y-axis. So that it hits this green rock. And you can get really specific. You can go to the side view. You can zoom in. You can press G. And you can move it along the y-axis. So press Y. And you can get really close if you want to get technical. Boom. So it hits it right there. So I've told Blender that at frame 40, this is where I want this red rock to be. So how do I do that? Well, I've just changed the location of this rock. So with this rock selected, I'm going to press I, and I'm going to add a location and rotation keyframe. So now, Blender knows that at frame 0 on my timeline, this red rock starts here. And then at frame 40, this rock better be here because that's what I told it. So you can go to the start, you can press your space bar, and you can see that the rock is moving. And you can press space to pause it. And we've got movement, we've got animation. So, what else can we change? Well, we've just changed the location of this first rock. But there's all these properties we can change, so let's give this rock some rotation. And if you're familiar with curling, you know that curlers, they don't just throw rocks straight, they throw rocks with some spin. So the rocks spin as they go down the ice. They rotate. So let's add some rotation to this rock. So let's go back to our keyframe 40. So you can click on this keyframe up at the top. And let's say that at this particular point in my timeline, I want my rock to have rotated. So I'm going to press R on my keyboard, and I'm going to lock it to my Z axis. And I want my rock to have rotated, I don't know, not crazy amount. Let's just spin it a little bit. Just like so. So that at this point in my timeline, I will want the rock to have rotated to this point. So I've just changed my model. I've changed my curling rock. I've added some rotation. So go ahead and press I, and let's update our keyframe by choosing the location and rotation. So now if I go back to my keyframe, my original one, it starts, but now it's spinning because I told Blender at keyframe 40, the rotation better be in that orientation at the end of the animation. And you can see this from the front view. As you play the animation, you can see the rock rotating from 0 to 40. Pretty cool. Now let's get really technical. Let's do one last change to this red rock. So if you are familiar with curling or just physics in general, if this rock is rotating to the left, in other words, it's spinning to the left, my rock should also move to the left. So instead of this rock traveling in a straight line, which we originally set it up to do, I want my rock to move to the left a little bit because it's spinning to the left. So I'm just trying to make my animation pretty accurate. So let's go back to this keyframe 40. And instead of this rock moving straight along the y-axis, I'm going to move it a little bit to the left, like so, along the x-axis. And how much to the left? Well, if I look at my side view, I press G to move it. I press X to lock it to my x-axis. You can line it up perfectly with the rock that's in front of it. Like that. So all I've done is I've just added some horizontal movement, some movement along the x-axis. And it may be a bit hard to see. Oh, I messed up already. Look at that. Remember, when you move something, G, X, don't forget to update your keyframe. So I'm going to press I, and I'm going to insert my location and rotation keyframe. There we go. Now I can move my timeline. So now my rock is doing three things. It's moving along the green axis, but it's also moving along the x-axis left to right, or right to left, I should say. And it's rotating. And so you can see from the front view, see how the rock is moving to the left as it's moving forward? Boo. So now I've got a pretty realistic animation for this rock that looks like it's been thrown. Now, if you have a really keen eye for detail, you may notice something looks a little bit funny. Your rock that is moving, it's moving all right, but it's not moving at a constant speed. It's accelerating at the start, so it moves slower at the start, and then it kind of slows down at the end. And you might not be able to see that, but you will when we change it. So it's not moving at a constant speed, this rock. It starts slow, then it goes a bit faster, and then it ends slow. So it really starts to slow down at the end of that animation. I don't like that. I want my rock to move at a constant speed. So what you can do is you can with this rock selected, you can right click that first keyframe, and you can go to this interpolation mode, and you can set it to linear. Now your rock is moving at a constant speed, a linear speed throughout the entire animation. And it looks a bit smoother. It's one speed, it doesn't slow down, it doesn't speed up, it just moves at one speed. And I have two keyframes here, but I can change where these keyframes are in the timeline. So for example, my rock is moving a bit slow right now. It's not moving very fast. So what I could do is I could grab this keyframe and I can move it anywhere in this timeline. So if I move this keyframe to 100, well, instead of this rock taking 40 frames to move, it's now going to take 100 frames to move. So it's going to move much slower. But if I move this keyframe, instead of it being at 40, if I move it to, I don't know, 20, now it only takes 20 frames to do that animation. And you can see that that means it's going to happen a lot quicker. So maybe let's pick a nice happy middle. Let's go 30. That's still pretty slow. That's okay. We can adjust these values later. Cool. So that's the very basics of animation in Blender. Now let's finish this animation, because when this rock hits the green rock, what should happen? Well, the green rock should move. So how do I do that? Well, at keyframe 30, so make sure your cursor's here, right when this red rock hits that green rock, I want the green rock to start moving. So what can I do? Well, I can click on this green rock. And notice I don't have any keyframes for the key rock or the green rock, because all I've been doing is the red rock. So if I click on this green rock, I'm going to press I, and I'm going to insert a location and rotation keyframe. This tells Blender that at frame 30, this green rock needs to be right here in your viewport. Let's move up a little bit. Let's move up to keyframe 70. And at frame 70, let's tell Blender that I want this green rock to have moved. So I'm going to press G. And I'm going to press Y to lock it to my Y-axis. I want it to have moved upwards so that it has hit this other green rock. So maybe right there. I've just made movement. I've made animation. So I have to tell Blender that at frame 70, that's where I want it to be. So I'm going to press I, location and rotation keyframe. And now Blender knows that from frame 30 to 70, this green rock needs to move. And it's doing that slowly moving and getting faster and then slowly slowing down. It's not moving at a constant speed. So once again, I'm just going to right click that first keyframe, interpolation mode, linear. So now it moves at one constant steady speed. So this is what I have so far. I think it looks fairly decent in terms of speed. Everything's kind of moving decently. I've made my life easy by just adding one animation to this middle rock. I've just moved it. I'm not going to rotate it or spin it or anything. I'm just going to keep it simple. However, at frame 70, this rock hits this rock. So I want this rock to move now. However, putting on my physics glasses, this rock, or your curling glasses, this rock does not hit the green rock straight on. So if I'm using my smarts, this rock isn't going to shoot out straight forward. It's actually going to shoot out somewhere to the left, because it's not getting hit on straight on. It's getting hit on the corner. So it's going to go boop to the left. So how do I do that? Well, make sure you're on keyframe 70. Click on this third rock. And at frame 70, I'm going to add a keyframe to tell Blender I want this rock to be here at frame 70. Let's go to frame 100 and let's move this rock. So I'm going to press G to move it. And I can move it along the y-axis by pressing Y and clicking. And then I can move it along the x-axis a little bit to the left. So let's see how this looks. So at frame 100, I want this rock to be here. So I'm going to press I, location and rotation. And now that green rock is moving that way. Let's go ahead and right click that keyframe, interpolation mode linear, and then boom. Let's do one last final thing. At frame 70, because these rocks aren't getting hit on in the straight on, I'm going to move with this rock selected at frame 100. I'm going to move this rock just slightly to the right. So here's a little trick. I'm going to hold shift and I'm going to press Z. So shift Z will allow me to move it along the X and Y. It basically means move it everywhere except the Z axis. And I'm just going to maybe put it right there. Insert, location, rotation. And so now when that rock gets hit, this one kind of goes off to the side. So what do we have so far? Start of my animation. Pretty cool. Let's add one final touch because it's just kind of annoying me. When these green rocks hit, let's give them some rotation, just like we did with the original red rock. So from 70 to 100, I'll choose this rock first. I'm going to press R to rotate it. I'm going to press Z because I want to rotate it on the Z axis. And I'm just going to spin it just a bit, like so. Spinning it to the right, spinning it clockwise. And I'm going to press I, location and rotation. And now that rock has some rotation to it. Similarly, at frame 100, I want this rock to have rotated a bit. So on frame 100, I'm going to press R, and I'm going to rotate it around the Z axis. Except I'm going to move this counterclockwise. I'm going to move it to the left a bit. Just a bit. Like so. Press I to tell Blender that you have added some movement. And now both of these rocks kind of spin out. And so now we've got a pretty decent animation. And there's a lot we could do to improve this, to make it look even more realistic. But I think that's enough right now. I think this covers the general basics of animating in Blender. Cool.